This week on Morning Mika, the kids, and actually adults too, are not okay.
Percy?
Yeah?
Wait, your name's Percy?
Yeah?
Percy? Sorry, continue. Percy? Doesn't anyone anymore?
That was Jennifer Lawrence in a scene from No Hard Feelings, finding a bunch of teens and 20-somethings glued to their phones at a house party. It underscores a troubling reality right now. A growing number of younger Americans aren't dating. They're not hanging out. And no, they're not even hooking up. For so many women who want to date men, dating has become a total nightmare. And there are a number of reasons why. I'm Mika Brzezinski here with Simone Sanders Townsend, Huma Abedin, and Jen Psaki. So I have heard from a lot of young women who want to date young men that there are none. There are no guys. They're trying to connect. They often use dating apps, but find a total lack of connection. And it seems that the men they are meeting don't really share the same priorities if they show up. Women, especially career-driven women, say the men they're meeting are more interested in sex and not looking for a deeper connection, and that it's becoming more and more of a problem. So what's changing? Because not that long ago, people used to meet each other through work, let's be honest, or through friends, maybe at a bar or in a college campus. And it gave people a chance to actually learn about each other, to break through the filters, to demonstrate kindness and show commitment and values, to actually earn affection. But today, so many people are living life through a screen. They're not going out nearly as much, not to church, not to movies, or even to the office. Opportunities to fall in love are falling by the wayside, meaning people are making decisions by swiping left on their smartphones rather than truly learning to connect. The highs, the lows, the disappointments, all of that stuff. It's all part of the process. And it's affecting mental health too. According to a recent study of people over the age of 18, those who used swipe-based dating apps experience significantly higher rates of psychological distress, anxiety, and depression. Another study showed a link between using dating apps and experiencing loneliness, dissatisfaction with life, and this is a big one, a feeling of exclusion from the world, feeling so left out. And when women do go to coffee shops, what we're hearing is that they try, or to a club or the grocery store, or anything where they get out and interact with people, they say the men that they want to meet just don't share their ideals. It's partly because so many young men are spending their lives also logged in, overly influenced by a flood of whatever you can find online, porn, video games, toxic masculinity. Who needs the real thing when you can get something better, and I put that in quotes, by scrolling? Here's what Scott Galloway, professor of marketing at NYU, told us on Morning Joe about some of the reasons why men are becoming like this.
I think you have the most talented, well-resourced people in the world and companies trying to convince a young man that he can have a reasonable facsimile of life in his basement behind a screen. You don't need friends. Go on Reddit or Discord. You don't need to get a job. Go on Robinhood or Coinbase and trade crypto and stocks. You don't need to go through the rejection and the expense and the humiliation and working out and having a plan and humor and showering to get a romantic relationship. You have YouPorn. So we have an entire generation, especially of young men, who are out home sequestering from society and missing out on what it means. You know, there's a reason romantic comedies are 2 hours and not 15 minutes. True victory in life is hard. Going out, meeting someone, finding mentors, finding mates, that stuff is hard, but that's what real victory in real life is like. And because a lot of men feel rejected on dating apps, the number of jobs that are accessible to them has gone down. You have essentially a group of men who are saying, I want a low-risk entry into life, and they go down a rabbit hole. When they don't have social connections, and they don't get out, and they don't have the prospect of a romantic relationship, they're more prone to conspiracy theory, they're more prone to misogynistic content, they're less likely to believe in climate change, and some they become really bad citizens. We are producing too many of the most dangerous person in the world, and that is a young, broke, and lonely young man.
Wow. As Professor Galloway pointed out, 1 in 3 relationships used to begin at work. Now young people are not going into the office as often. And if you are a young man at work, are you more or less inclined to express some sort of romantic interest in a potential partner now than you were 40 years ago? The answer is clearly no. And by the way, men and women have been told in many places that if you have feelings for someone at work, you have to go to HR first. That'll kill the moment. And I get why that's the policy. I get how we got here. Having said that, the unforeseen consequences of the Me Too movement, or of Me Too in general, and the problems that began the movement, that's a show we need to do at some point. And we have to have a really honest conversation about that. But that's not this show. I'm just saying having to go to HR is kind of a hard start. Jen, why don't you start? What are the biggest concerns you have here?
Yeah, look, Mika, first of all, I met my husband at work at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He asked me out over email and brought me ice cream. It was a much more traditional way of meeting someone. Look, I think the biggest concern I have here is the mental health impact on young people. And we've seen that in statistics and a ton of reporting about the disconnect. And you just went over a fair amount of it for men, certainly, and also for women. And I just think anecdotally of talking to a lot of women I work with, who I have the pleasure of working with on my team, they, men and women have been wanting to just have sex for decades, right? That's not new. I think they're still probably they're hooking up still, right? But it's more about that deeper connection. And as Scott said, relationships are work. Emotional connections are work, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whatever it may be, or a mentor relationship. And there's such a cotton candy aspect of the world we're living in right now. That's also a fantasy world, right? You mentioned porn. That's, of course, on the sex side. But it's also just how people portray themselves on social media. It's not connected to the difficulty and the struggle that often you have to go through in order to have the most rewarding relationship, the most rewarding friendships, the most rewarding mentorships. And the mental health impact is the biggest concern, because connection is what makes life joyful. And that to me is what I worry about the most.
Yes, Simone, Americans are more lonely and isolated than ever. There's data on this. And what do you make of Professor Galloway's remarks on Morning Joe that we're producing too many of the most dangerous people in the world, namely young, broke, and lonely men?
You know, Mika, I thought that a lot of Professor Galloway's comments were interesting. I listened to the whole segment twice yesterday because, one, I think that people are going out. And also, I don't think that I didn't meet my husband at work. I actually met my husband going out. I was at an event. After the event, some folks introduced, at the time, he was what was known in Washington, D.C. as the Nightmare. And some folks that I know asked me, oh, do you know the Nightmare? I said, I've heard of him. I do not know him. I've never had the pleasure. And that was I like to say we've been dating ever since. I think he might take issue with my timeline. So I would argue that people are going out in different social settings. But I also think the apps, for example, are not terrible. One of my best girlfriends met her husband on the apps. You know, I know a lot of people who are meeting folks on the apps, and it is opening up, frankly, the world of the dating pool bigger than just who comes to your neighborhood bar or who you might see in the office. And so I think that is a good thing. Look, I think about these lonely, broke, dangerous men. I don't really know, Mika. I'm not sold on the lonely, broke, and dangerous men. I think that we are producing a generation of younger people who do not have hustle and drive, and the lack of hustle and drive one is where I do agree with Professor Galloway, in that, you know, there's a younger generation of people who would rather be home than go out and socialize. But I think the idea that folks are not going out, that folks are not socializing, is not true. More so, I think it's that there's the pool of men that women would like to date is smaller. There's more women than men. It has always been that way. When I moved to Washington, D.C., that's what everyone said. It's like, for every one guy, there's 10 women that want to date him. So there's that.
Yeah. Well, I see the numbers that you're talking about. I really connect with your reticence about the lonely, broken, dangerous. I guess the inference that you have to have a woman to fix that. Like, you can fix that yourself, and not be, I hear you about personal responsibility for sure. But I'm seeing in my world and hearing from a lot of young people who work with me, who work for me, who just, they don't go out as much. There's like nowhere to go, or no one to go with, or it's the same old every time, and they're on the phones so much. And whom I'm wondering, given the consequences of loneliness and isolation from a policy perspective, because the Surgeon General recently declared the loneliness is an epidemic. Is there an obligation on the part of our government or policies to address some of these growing social disconnects that are happening in our country?
So, I mean, I agree with so much. My mind is just spinning with thoughts hearing all three of you. And I'm glad you referenced the Surgeon General, because the four of us talk about this a lot, that we are pioneers. We're raising a generation, surrounded by technology that we just didn't have access to growing up. And we're still seeing the short and long-term impact of that. I love that you just mentioned the Surgeon General report. We talk about it in the context of just this. We're talking about it.
Yeah.
When you look at things like smoking, it's not that we think people are going to quit smoking or stop using tobacco, but when you buy a cigarette, it will say there's a warning that this is bad for your health. I was at an office meeting the other day and I saw, a box saying, here's, if you need Narcan, it's, it's in this lockbox, get help. It's not that we think people are going to stop using drugs and that there might never be an overdose again. We are aware of it. We have a solution to it. And this is all part of public policy and the importance of having public policy. And I think to have that 80+ page report, number one, you have a Surgeon General who addresses his own issues with loneliness, deep feelings of loneliness, and what governments can do and schools and communities and parents can do. And to both what Jen and Simone just said, I think about this. I met my ex-husband at work, and I met my current boyfriend, and I will say, in a period where I was feeling very lonely and was invited to this party. I did not want to go. I just wanted to stay at home and just probably be on my phone, watch The Diplomat or something. I dragged myself to that party, and that is how I met him. And so it's we have to talk about it, but we also have to be open to experiences. Sometimes even at our generation, we have to push ourselves to do it.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Huma, because, and Simone, to your point that people are going out, they are, but there are a lot of people who are in Huma's position where they have to, it takes everything in them just to get out the door. And there's a growing number of cases like that, where the phone and remote work, and you just get into such a, what's the word, a bad cycle.
A rut.
You don't want to go out anymore.
Yeah.
A rut.
It makes me think
Simone.
about the importance of your friends and the people that know you best in your circle, because you are correct. And even sometimes I'm the friend that is dragging people out. It's like, no, come, you have to come. And if the friend hadn't dragged me, I like to party. But it is the importance of the circle, and I think that that's maybe also something. If people are feeling this innate sense of loneliness, even if they know people that are their friends may not know. And so that's the importance of checking up on folks.
Yes, and seeing them and feeling them and understanding and connecting. Up next, we asked you, our viewers, for solutions to combat the loneliness pandemic. The response was absolutely incredible. We've got great ideas for you when Morning Mika returns.